I'm Dana Searles, and welcome to This Week in Iowa Politics on We Are Iowa Plus. Each week, I break down everything Iowans need to know, from your local races for the critical midterm elections to bills moving through the State House and what Iowa's leaders are doing on Capitol Hill. This week, Iowa lawmakers are officially in overtime. On Tuesday, their per diem pay ran out, meaning lawmakers are now officially working without pay. And the stalemate over the final gavel coming down to Republicans finding an agreement on property taxes, and there was plenty of movement over the proposals. You might remember last week the Senate passed its property tax proposal with bipartisan support. Well, this week the House amended that bill, held a public hearing, debated it, and then moved that proposal through its chamber. Now, the House amended the Senate's proposal to align more with its original bill. The House amended the bill to have a hard 2% cap on revenue growth. The House also wants to allocate 25% of revenue from the SAVE plan, which is a sales tax providing funding for school infrastructure and technology. It would move that revenue towards property tax relief. It would also lower the state's $5.40 uniform levy for school foundation property taxes to just $5 by converting the existing homestead tax credit to an exemption, while tripling its amount of exemptable tax value to $15,000. Now, the bill also incorporates some of Governor Reynolds' proposal that would allocate $10 million to help local governments consolidate. Meanwhile, the differences in the Senate bill is that it had a soft 2% cap that was more tied to inflation. That is a factor Senate Majority Leader Mike Clemish says they feel strongly about. The Senate also wants to eliminate Iowa's rollback system that limits a property's taxable value. So here's why House Republicans felt the need to amend it.
We've tried a number of ways to lower property taxes with the carrot approach. I think really the only way that we are going to be able to move property taxes and decrease them is with a hard cap.
Then in a hearing earlier in the week, the public had an opportunity to weigh in. Small town leaders shared concerns over the hard cap and its ability to fund local departments. Meanwhile, landlords expressed concerns around having to raise rent for its tenants.
Landlords don't absorb the cost of increased taxes and insurance costs. Those expenses flow directly through to the tenants. When the cost of operating rental housing rises, landlords are forced to adjust their rents simply just to keep the properties maintained, insured, and financially viable.
Then the bill passed the House floor, but not after it faced some debate.
For too long, our property tax system has put certainty for government budgets over the certainty of family budgets. Today, we flip that script. This plan isn't about maintaining the status quo for taxing entities, and I recognize that change can be uncomfortable. However, for too long, the status quo has been causing pain for the people we represent, and it's their discomfort we're addressing here today.
It's going to put a 2% cap in place, saying that this is going to solve all the world's problems. The problem isn't the cap. The problem continues to be that assessments continue to rise, and I don't care if it's 2%, 3%, if the value of your property is going up, you will never lower your levy fast enough to be able to truly lower property taxes.
And at the end of the week, Senate Majority Leader Mike Clemish weighed in on the Senate's next steps. Here's what he said.
So the House's counter proposal to our proposal has led to conversations. So I think we'll spend some time identifying what each chamber really can't live without, so to speak, in those proposals. And then those anchor points will then be how we build from there and continue the conversation.
Now, if the Senate passes the bill as is, then it will head to Governor Reynolds' desk. But if they do amend it, it will then go back to the House for approval. However, property taxes weren't the only thing that was happening at the State House this week. On the governor's desk right now is a bill that would add protections for foster parents. Now, the bill was actually proposed last year and was brought back by lawmakers later this session. The bill says a potential foster parent can't be ruled out for their intent to raise a child consistent with their religious or moral beliefs. It also adds that foster parents can't be ruled out for accepting or supporting a policy related to sexual orientation or gender gender identity that conflicts with their beliefs. It was a split vote with strong debate from both chambers. Those for this bill say it will help increase Iowa's pool of foster parents. Meanwhile, those against it believe it could put LGBTQ youth at risk. Now, the House passed the bill in a vote of 58 to 34, with 4 Republicans breaking with their party to vote against it and 1 Democrat voting in favor. Then the Senate passed it with a party line vote of 28 to 16. Passing in the House is a massive bill that would add new restrictions on SNAP benefits and make changes to school lunches. It's a bill proposed by Governor Reynolds, and the bill is known as the Make America Healthy Bill. And it aligns Iowa with many of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s priorities. Now, what the bill would do: the bill would limit what Iowans can buy with SNAP benefits. Under the bill, Iowans wouldn't be allowed to use food assistance dollars to buy unhealthy foods like candy. The bill also bans certain food dyes from school lunches, including red dye number 40, which is often found in candy, sodas, and ice cream. Also, K through 5 students would be limited to just 60 minutes of digital learning per day. This bill now heads back to the Senate for approval and then to the governor's desk if there are no amendments. Well, our countdown to the midterm primaries continues this week, and this week we focus on the race for Iowa's U.S. Senate seat. Senator Joni Ernst is not running for re-election, leaving Iowa with its first open seat in a dozen years. So for the Republicans, Ashley Hinson, current U.S. Representative, and Jim Carlin are vying for the GOP nomination. Meanwhile, on the Democratic side, current State Representative Josh Turek and current State Senator Zach Wahls are both running for the seat. So this week I sat down with Democratic candidate Zach Wahls to learn more about his campaign and his priorities. So here's part 1 of our conversation. Well, Zach Wahls, candidate for U.S. Senate, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate your time.
It's great to be here, Dana. Thank you.
Start off by telling me, how is the campaign going? You're pretty thick into it right now, leading up to primaries.
Yeah, we're really excited. So we're down to the final 6 weeks before the June 2nd Democratic primary. Early vote starts in just a few weeks. We got a brand new poll today showing us leading Ashley Hinson by 2 points, which is really exciting, performing better than my Democratic opponent in that general election matchup. And that reflects the energy that we've been hearing from Iowans as we've been traveling all over the state. We launched our Iowans Over Insiders tour just last week, talking about the need to build an economy that works for everyday Iowans, cleaning up the corruption that we can see from leaders, frankly, in both parties in Washington, D.C. for far too long, and the need for a new vision for the future of states like Iowa. And that has been resonating with people across the political spectrum, in big cities, small towns, rural communities. And so we're really excited about the progress that we're making. And if folks want to learn more, they can go to zachwahls.com to see what we've got going on and how to get involved.
And we'll jump into a handful of priorities here. But first, I want to start off by asking you, you're already a young state senator. What made you want to take that leap and run for U.S. Senate?
Yeah. Everywhere, in my district, and I represent a district that has included big cities and small towns and more rural communities, I hear from so many of my constituents who are struggling to make ends meet, even though they're working harder than ever. We have an economy that is working great for the billionaires, great for the big corporations, but so many working class, middle class, retired Iowans are really struggling to keep up. And so my view is that is the direct result of the corruption of our politics, these special interests in D.C. that use their super PACs and big money to influence lawmakers. That has to change. I've seen that corruption firsthand in the State House. We can all see it happening in Washington right now. And I believe that Iowans need someone who's willing to fight on their behalf. That's what I've done in the state Senate. It's exactly what I'll do as your next United States Senator.
And yesterday, actually, you unveiled a new list of priorities. A lot of them, no surprise, we know a lot of the issues you're running on, but tell me a little bit about why that was important for you. I know number 1 on that list was raising the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, to $15 an hour. Why is that number 1, I guess? And then going down the list, why were those, so important for you, and how do you plan to implement that in Washington?
So a couple of the big priorities. We had a comprehensive 10-point plan talking about building an economy that works for Iowans. Number 1 is growing wages, salaries, paychecks, benefits. That is something that we hear about everywhere we go, is that the cost of living has continued to rise. The Trump tariffs that Ashley Hinson has voted for have made so much of that worse, and wages haven't been keeping up. And so we need to boost wages. That includes raising the federal minimum wage. That includes strengthening the ability of labor unions to negotiate fair contracts, to make sure that they have good compensation for their members, which helps raise the standard for all Iowans. It means that we have to protect Social Security. I'm the only candidate to release a plan talking about how we strengthen, we call it the Keep the Promise Act, to strengthen Social Security and to reverse the cuts that Ashley Hinson voted for. Not many Iowans know that Ashley Hinson is on the record voting to cut hundreds of millions of dollars from Social Security, which is the exact wrong thing for the state of Iowa. We also talk about the need to tax billionaires. We call for a 5% wealth tax. This is something that would make sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share, that we can make those investments in things like childcare. My wife and I have a 2-year-old, and we were stunned when we enrolled Elijah into his daycare center to find out that our daycare costs more than our mortgage. It was absolutely unbelievable, and I hear about that issue from so many young Iowa families, people who want to start a family, who want to have another kid, and they literally cannot afford to. And that is not just a Democratic issue. I hear that from Republicans and independents, just like I hear it from Democrats. And that is the sign of an economy that has been rigged to work great for the people at the very top at our expense. And that is exactly why we need change.
And if you're elected to U.S. Senate in this seat, it's a critical seat that, Republicans are hoping to keep Republican and Democrats are trying to flip as well. A lot of national eyes actually on this race. If you are elected as a Democratic U.S. Senator for Iowa, how would you plan to work across the aisle, because there's such slim majorities on Capitol Hill right now? How would you plan to work across the aisle to ensure these priorities can get across the finish line?
Well, look, we know Republicans are really nervous about this seat. Their super PAC just announced $29 million that they are spending this November trying to defend this seat and to buy it for Ashley Hinson. But we are seeing super PACs come in from Chuck Schumer as well, supporting my Democratic opponent in this race. You might have seen some of his ads on TV. They've spent over $4.5 million of outside money coming into Iowa. And I think that's the wrong thing. I've been very clear. I'm not going to support Chuck Schumer for leader because it is national Democratic leaders like Chuck Schumer who have said on television that our party should write off rural and blue-collar voters. I fundamentally disagree. That is not the Democratic Party that I want to belong to. And as Iowa's United States Senator, I will never support Democratic leaders who want to write off rural and blue-collar voters or states like Iowa. That means that we have to build a coalition that includes not just Democrats, but independents and even Republicans who are looking at what's happening in Washington, D.C., and who are ready to make a change. That's how I've approached my time in the legislature. I've been able to work across the aisle when there are things where we do need to be able to cooperate in a bipartisan way. I've also fought for the values of my constituents and of this party. That means fighting for workers' rights, fighting for women's rights, fighting for civil rights. It means fighting for immigrants when they need a voice as well. And that is a point of some real contrast in this Democratic primary. My Democratic opponent voted with Republicans on a bill that the ACLU of Iowa called the most extreme, discriminatory, and unconstitutional anti-immigrant law in the country. I believe that we need to be willing to do what we need to do do what is right for Iowa. That is going to mean working across the aisle when we can, fighting against national party leaders when we have to, but always looking for opportunities to make Iowa a better place to call home.
And you mentioned the funding for this campaign, both for your Democratic challenger as well as Ashley Hinson on the Republican side, talking about a lot of those national or out-of-state super PACs bringing money into these campaigns. People who are seeing all these ads, what would you want to say to them on why maybe you're not receiving this same funding from these out-of-state people and funding?
Well, it's really simple. I've been willing to challenge national leaders in both parties. That has been the reputation that I've built here in the state of Iowa, and that is the promise that I'm going to keep when I'm in the United States Senate. I'm not running for the United States Senate to work for Chuck Schumer or Donald Trump or the billionaires and the big corporations. I'm running for the United States Senate to work for you. That's the reputation that I've built in the Senate, and that's exactly what I'll do as your next United States Senator. My view is that these big DC super PACs should not be coming into Iowa and spending huge amounts of money benefiting either Ashley Hinson or Representative Turek. My Democratic opponent obviously has a different view. That is part of why he has been unwilling to call for new leadership and to say that he would not vote for Chuck Schumer. That is a point of real distinction in this race. But I will also tell you, Dana, that is something that is respected by people on both sides of the aisle. When we were in Newton yesterday, we heard from folks who were more in that independent category that they liked the fact that I've been willing to call it like it is and say that we need new leadership, and that includes both parties.
How would you ensure that Iowans' voices, from, small town, from in Newton, how would you ensure that their voice is heard on Capitol Hill?
We've been really intentional in this campaign about building those relationships everywhere we go. We've been to 70 counties of the 99 and counting, put well over 20,000 miles on the car and climbing every single day. And along the way, as we've been building these relationships, we've been showing up to listen, to understand the challenges that are facing these communities, and winning support along the way. I'm also the only Democratic candidate who has represented small town and rural Iowa. I live in Coralville, which is outside of Iowa City, but when I was first elected, my district included not just Johnson County, where I live, but all of Cedar County and Muscatine County. And in Cedar County, and I had the whole county, the largest community, great community of Tipton, population 3,100 and a single stoplight. That's small town Iowa. And I know that the experience that I have representing communities like the ones that I had in Cedar County, and some small towns in Johnson County too, that is going to make me a much more effective United States Senator, because it gives me an understanding of these issues, how we build those relationships, and frankly, how we win those voters back. Because we've lost a lot of those small town and rural communities in this state. And that's also part of why I'm never going to vote for Chuck Schumer for leader. He's saying that we should write these voters off. I want to represent them.
And that is just the beginning of that interview. So coming up, he shares with me what sets him apart from his Democratic challenger and how he plans to campaign against his Republican challenger if he wins that June primary. Current Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate Zach Wahls is in a tight primary race against a colleague in the Iowa legislature, State Representative Josh Turek. So in the next part of the interview, I ask him what sets him apart and the choices he would make if he is in Washington. I want to ask about a few timely issues on Capitol Hill. The war in Iran, a lot of people have eyes on what's going to happen there. That 60-day timeline for the president to get a war powers resolution, that's quickly approaching. If you are elected to the U.S. Senate, if you were in the Senate right now, would you be voting for a war powers resolution?
We spoke out immediately against this new war with Iran. And my view is that Iowa needs a senator who is not going to support an endless war in the Middle East. There's real contrast here with Representative Hinson, who has been cheerleading this war from its very beginning. The reality is that the long-term peace and security of that region is going to be negotiated at the bargaining table, not the result of a war that has not been authorized by Congress. My view is that the fighting, the Trump administration now, they've asked for $50 billion as a supplementary aid package to fund this war. That's money that we should be investing in our rural hospitals, making sure that every Iowa kid has enough to eat when they're at school, in lowering the cost of prescription medication, making childcare, housing more affordable, nursing home care more affordable. And so I don't want to hear from this administration that we don't have money to pay for these priorities at home while they're engaged in a war of choice abroad. It doesn't have to be this way. And as Iowa's next United States Senator, I will vote to make sure that this stops, that we have a diplomatic solution, that we can invest in our state rather than funding another war overseas.
Another thing I want to ask about is navigating a government shutdown, specifically, what we're seeing with the Department of Homeland Security and funding DHS. How would you navigate that as a senator representing Iowa?
Government shutdowns are incredibly serious. They are not something that should be treated lightly. My mom, Jackie, is a federal employee. She works for the VA hospital in the Iowa City, Coralville area. And so I see firsthand, how much more strain they are all under when the federal government is going through shutdowns. What I would tell you is that when shutdowns are, in effect, there has to be a very intentional strategy from the folks who are voting against funding the government, and there has to be a very clear reason why they are doing what they are doing. That's a big problem that I have with Chuck Schumer. You look at this most recent big shutdown that we saw last year, they did not have a strategy, they did not have a message. They went into that, not ready to actually negotiate how they would end it. And that was exactly why Senate Democrats folded under Senator Schumer's leadership. And so when I think about how you approach funding the government in power, I don't ever want to see federal employees be used as bargaining chips at the table, because the services that they provide, whether it's to our nation's veterans, to TSA, these are really important services that a lot of Iowans rely on. When you are going to go down that road, it has to be for the right reason with the right strategy. That's not what we're seeing right now. And so my view is that I know that the current one that we're talking about has to do with how you overhaul ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement, and it is clear that that needs to be overhauled. This current strategy, though, is obviously creating some real challenges for a lot of people.
So how would you kind of navigate that, trying to address what a lot of Democrats on Capitol Hill want to see done with reforms to ICE versus making sure our federal employees are paid? How would you navigate those?
Well, again, you got to know what your strategy is when you're going into it, and what your message is. And I think it is very clear. ICE as an agency needs to be completely overhauled. There's no doubt that the way that they have been operating within, you look at what's happened in Minnesota over the last several months, is completely unacceptable. And so I don't oppose the idea that you need to have some leverage in that negotiation. At the same time, I think the current approach is clearly not working.
I want to ask a few more about your campaign values. I want to ask about your Build the Barn campaign value. That's something that's pretty unique. So I want to ask just a little bit about how you came to this and how you're pitching that to Iowans on the campaign
you're actually the first person to ask me about this in a media interview, so I really appreciate that. Last year, my wife and I and some very close friends of ours were thinking about launching this campaign to run at the time against Senator Ernst. We wanted to make sure that the campaign was going to reflect our values and that would reflect the values that I was raised with. My mom, Terry, was a fifth-generation Iowa farm girl from Clayton County. And growing up, she always talked about the importance, and she modeled the importance of hard work, integrity, looking out for your neighbors, never forgetting where we come from, and integrity, fighting for people who need a voice. And when we were kind of starting to build the campaign, I happened to just stumble across a quote that I really spoke to me, which is that any jackass can kick down a barn. It takes a carpenter to build one. And so that has become the unofficial mantra of our campaign, looking for opportunities to build that barn. It's a metaphor, obviously, but for our state. Because if you look at what's going on right now, Iowa's in a tough spot. We have fallen to 49th in our state economy, 48th in personal income, #1 in cancer. Our public schools that used to lead the nation have fallen to the middle of the pack and are falling further behind. And so there's a lot of work to do to build that better future for everybody who calls Iowa home. You mentioned earlier the conversations we've been having with people at the local levels. We've been traveling across the state. And to me, that's how you build a strong foundation, because that's where it has to come from, right? It doesn't come from consultants, it doesn't come from pollsters, it doesn't come from Washington or super PACs. It comes from the people of this state in all 99 counties. And so when we think about building that barn, it starts by listening to people on the ground to understand the challenges, the hopes, the fears, the dreams, their ideas about how we build that better future. You put it all together through a lot of hard work, and hopefully you can have something stronger on the other side.
Being somebody who's quite young running for a U.S. Senate seat, how would you plan, and having a lot of experience too, running at a young age for this U.S. Senate seat, how would you plan to bring that perspective and that aspect to the U.S. Senate?
Look, I was 27 years old when I was first elected to the Iowa State Senate in 2018. I was the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate. 7 years later, I'm going to be later today actually giving my retirement speech to the Iowa Senate. But I am still the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate at the age of 34. And when we win in November, I will actually be the youngest member of the United States Senate. To your point, I do have 2 terms in the Iowa State Senate, 8 years under my belt. And so I do feel ready for the challenges. It's going to be a steep learning curve, of course, but I'm totally confident in our ability to get up to speed and to represent the state in the U.S. Senate. And I think that the perspective that you bring as a young person is really important, because a lot of young people right now feel like they aren't being represented in Washington, D.C., or frankly, in this state. The challenges that young people are facing, whether that's the cost of childcare that we talked about earlier, the cost of higher education, which is totally out of control, the lack of economic opportunity. We've seen artificial intelligence already starting to make it harder to find entry-level employment for folks who are just getting out of high school or college. There are a lot of concerns, and I think a belief that many of the people who are in power don't understand what is happening. And that is one of the reasons why we decided to launch this campaign. I do believe it is time for a new generation of leadership. And I also think that that applies to our own party, which is why I've said that I won't support Senator Schumer. And I think that when you think about the perspective that young people bring, it's overdue.
You're up against a colleague in the Iowa legislature for the primary in June. How do you set yourself apart?
Yeah, we've talked about a few of those things already. I think the fact that I've been willing to call for new leadership for our party and he is not is a big one. The representation that I have actually had representing small town and rural Iowa in my Senate district, I think is another one. And then finally, I do think there are some real differences on policy. We talked about his support for a bill that the ACLU of Iowa called the worst anti-immigrant bill in the history of our state. And I think that's something that as Democratic primary voters are thinking about who they want to support in November. They want someone who's going to be willing to fight for this state, who's willing to take on leaders in both parties when that's what it takes. Who, and I will say this as a contrast with Ashley Hinson, Representative Hinson has been a rubber stamp for this agenda. She has voted for the tariffs 4 different times. She voted to give Elon Musk a massive, massive tax cut. She voted to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from rural health care, from food assistance, and from investments in clean energy to keep our utility bills affordable. And so from my perspective, I think the contrast with Representative Hinson in November is going to be a heck of a lot easier if you've got somebody who is willing to say, I'll take on leaders in both parties if they're not working for us. That's who I am, that's what I've done, and that's what I'll do in the U.S. Senate.
And that kind of leads into my next question there is if you do win the June primary, you could potentially be up against Ashley Hinson, who has, statewide name recognition there, currently a U.S. representative. How would you navigate that? And how would you kind of put yourself on that platform against her, against somebody who does have that name recognition?
What I would tell you is from the very first day of this campaign, we have been focused on building a coalition that includes Democrats, but extends an open hand to independents and some Republicans who are looking at what's happening in Washington, D.C. and are not happy about what's going on. When we launched the campaign, I was running against Senator Joni Ernst, who has won statewide elections. Representative Hinson, of course, is in the northeast part of the state. Now, Senator Ernst is no longer seeking re-election because of her unfortunate comment about her health care plan and just waiting for Iowans to die. But when Representative Hinson got into the race, I have to tell you, Dana, I was pretty excited. I've seen Representative Hinson operate firsthand when she and I served in the state legislature at the same time my first 2 years. And I've seen her side with insiders in Des Moines over Iowa families and selling people out for support for her campaigns. That is exactly what is wrong with our politics. And Iowans across the political spectrum are sick of it. That is part of why we have made anti-corruption such a core focus of this campaign. When we launched our Iowans Over Insiders tour last week, we started with a comprehensive plan to clean up the corruption that we can see in Washington, D.C. The three things that we really want to emphasize is, number one, overturning Citizens United and getting big money out of our politics. I'm a strong supporter of common sense term limits. I'm a new dad. I've changed a lot of diapers in the last 2 years. And I have a new appreciation for Mark Twain's old observation that politicians and diapers should be changed regularly and for the same reason. And finally, I've made a personal promise that I will not own, trade, sell any individual stocks, cryptocurrency, gamble on these prediction markets if elected to the Senate. And I'll support bipartisan legislation to make sure that none of my colleagues or anybody in the White House is able to do that either. Iowans deserve to have a senator and a representative who they know is working for them, not just getting rich in their own bank accounts at the taxpayer expense. We do these things, we can start to rebuild that trust that we have a government that actually works for us, not just the insiders. That's what this campaign is all about. It's resonating with people across the political spectrum, and whether that's in this Democratic primary or against Representative Hinson, I know that that is a winning message, and that's exactly why we're going to win in November.
Awesome. Well, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And countdown to the June primaries is on.
Absolutely.
So appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
And as we continue interviewing candidates leading up to the midterm primaries, you can watch the full interviews right here on We're Iowa Plus. You can find all of those interviews, including Democratic candidate for governor Rob Sand and Republican gubernatorial candidate Brad Sherman, all under the state politics category. Well, coming up, Senate Democrats blocked the confirmation of a Governor Reynolds appointee, why they voted against confirming the new director of Iowa's Department of Health and Human Services, and how Governor Reynolds is now responding. Well, this week, Senate Democrats blocked the confirmation of Governor Kim Reynolds' appointee to lead Iowa's Department of Health and Human Services. Larry Johnson was appointed director by Governor Reynolds in September of last year to take over for Kelly Garcia. Now, in order for one of the governor's nominees to be approved, it requires 2/3 of a vote in the Iowa Senate or 34 votes in total. Johnson received 28 votes for his nomination, with 17 votes against. Now, Governor Reynolds said in a statement, quote, "I am disgusted that Senate Democrats voted against his confirmation today for purely political reasons." Also adding, Senate Democrats chose to break with decades of custom rather than informing my office of concerns about the nomination they made. They made a politically motivated choice to disrupt an agency responsible for the well-being of most vulnerable Iowans. It's disappointing, and their decision puts Iowa HHS and the people they serve at great risk. Meanwhile, Senate Senate Minority Leader Janice Weiner responded, saying, quote, "Hundreds of thousands of Iowans rely on the Department of Health and Human Services. But under Mr. Johnson's leadership, those Iowans have been met with diminished care and services and a disrespectful lack of transparency and communication." Also adding that they have been forced to run bills this session without the adequate fiscal information, claiming the department refused to provide it. So now we talked about a lot that lawmakers accomplished this week being in overtime. So the question is, what comes next? Well, lawmakers can't gavel out until they reach a budget deal. However, they will work to address all the priorities that they want to get across the finish line before passing that final budget. Now, the biggest priority left on the table is property taxes. While lawmakers go back and forth, they can still pass other bills on the table. The Senate and the House must agree on the same bill for both the budget and property taxes before that final gavel can fall. They will work without pay until then. So there is still a lot to track after another very busy week in Iowa politics. So let's look ahead to what we're tracking next week. Next week, I sit down with another candidate on the ballot for the June primary. I'll speak with Republican gubernatorial candidate Adam Steen. He shares his pitch for Iowans and top campaign priorities. Also, we'll provide an update on the legislative session and where those property tax negotiations currently stand. We'll have that and much more next week on This Week in Iowa Politics. Thank you all for watching on We Are Iowa Plus. I'm Dana Searles. Have a great day.